Good evening and welcome to another virtual Virtuoso from the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. I'm William Intriligator, music director and conductor, and I'm so glad you joined us this evening. Joining me today is our wonderful principal oboist, Gina Johnson. Welcome, Gina.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to see you again. Like with so many of our musicians of the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra, we miss you.
I miss being with you guys too. This is cool. Thanks for thinking outside of the box so we can continue to perform and share.
Yes, of course. Now, if you could tell us, where are you right now? Where do you make home?
I live in Western Nebraska, Scottsbluff to be specific. And a lot of people think that that's really close to Omaha. In fact, actually, William, I think you are closer to Omaha than I am, to be honest with you. That's like 8 hours away. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So Cheyenne is just an hour and 45 minutes away is all.
That's great. Now tell me, Gina, where did you grow up and when did you start playing the oboe?
If I can call any place home, I moved around a lot. My dad was one who came in and rescued failing ski areas. And so we would stay there 2 or 3 years, and then we would move on to the next ski area and the next ski area. And so I really moved around a lot. But if I can call any place home, it would be Greeley, Colorado. So just down the road from Cheyenne as well.
Yeah, that's great. Now I have to ask, are you a big skier?
I love to ski. I love to ski. I get so excited when it snows, and then I remember where I live, and it doesn't help anything. So, yeah.
Now, I know that you did some of your graduate work, or no, I think it was your undergrad also in Greeley, right?
I did. So I lived in Greeley for a lot of my formative years. And then the last 2 years of high school, I lived in Minneapolis and got an amazing education there, incredible culture up there, and was just so grateful that I got to spend, years 16, 17, and 18 up there in Minneapolis. But I did decide to go back down to UNC in Greeley and do my bachelor's degree there. I studied 1 year with Nancy King, and then she moved on to Champaign-Urbana at the time, and of course has moved on since then to an even bigger school. But I did get to spend a lot of time studying with Peter Cooper, who is the principal oboist of the Colorado Symphony. And he is a taskmaster. He's really tough, but he produces excellent students. So I'm grateful.
I'm so glad you can smile and laugh about it now, because I'm sure in the moment, his being so tough wasn't such a happy thing.
I cried a lot of tears. We'll just put it that way. I get so frustrated. I'd come with my very best product that I could present that week. I'd practiced and made these reeds. And I remember one time I came to him and I said, "This is a great reed." And he had me play on it, and he did his little, and I thought, oh no, what did I do? And he said, "This is not a great reed. You think this is a great reed?" And I thought, oh no, I did. Until right now, I thought it was a great reed. What's wrong with it?
Now, for those patrons who are watching, or audience members in general who are watching who aren't oboists and may not realize this, oboists make their own reeds, and don't we? And I say we because oboe is my main instrument as well, and I've had the pleasure of playing with Gina. So reed making is a really big part of studying an oboe, isn't it? It's something you basically have to do every day, like practicing.
Yes, it is its own set of skills. Yes, yeah. It is.
Do you enjoy it as much as anybody could enjoy something that they have to do?
I'm so glad you worded it that way, because no, I don't enjoy it at all. I don't. So what I do during the summertime, there's a whole process of making the reeds it's just routine and it's scientific, and so it's pretty boring, really. So what I do is I watch a lot of movies in the summertime, and I do a lot of that preliminary scientific type of stuff during the summertime.
And then refine each reed to make them really, and the artistry really comes in that last stage of refining the reed, and then you do that closer to each concert, I bet.
I do, because as the weather changes and the barometric pressure changes and the humidity changes, and depending on where I am in elevation, I have to tailor make each reed to pretty much wherever I'm going to be. Yeah.
And as a classical musician, you often have the summers off, so that would make sense. You have more time to do some of that, you know, kind of, I guess you would call it like laying the groundwork kind of work for the reed making. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Well, just between us and our watchers, and I would say that reed making, in my experience as an oboist, is one of the reasons why I'm a conductor. It also wasn't my cup of tea, although I have to say I think I was pretty good at it, but I couldn't imagine doing that the rest of my life. But I do really enjoy still playing the oboe, and it has been a real pleasure and a highlight of my last few years that we got to play together in that concert in Cheyenne.
I agree. That was fun. That was really fun.
It was.
Yep.
Now, I remember you telling me on another occasion, Gina, that during those few years that you were in Minneapolis, you got to have a very, very special opportunity as a young oboist. I mean, somebody in your teens, you got to study with really a world famous oboist. Tell us about that.
His name is Rodimus Angelucci. He died actually my senior year of high school. I got to study with all kinds of wonderful oboists. Marilyn Zupnik, who played with the Minneapolis, principal oboe with Minnesota Orchestra, excuse me. But yes, Rodimus Angelucci, I got to play with him his last handful of months of his life when he was going through chemotherapy. And it's just amazing, you know, how quickly we can adopt somebody's sound. You know, just in those handful of months, he was so musical, and it was all about the musicality, and you must sing. And I still remember him talking about spinning the air through the oboe, and you must speak to the person in the last row of the auditorium. And if they can't hear you, then they wasted their money. You know, they paid good money to come and hear you, and if you can't play loud enough, then you did them a disservice. I mean, he was this Italian man. He was so flamboyant, and he wasn't feeling well, so that, you know, took all of the barricades down, and he was just as raw Italian as you could imagine, which was really good for me at the time. But yes, he was absolutely a legend, and I'm so grateful that I did get to study with him. It was several years later that I was at UNC, and we were playing, oh gosh, I think it was a Haydn cello concerto, where it's all strings and a cellist and just an oboist, I believe, in the orchestra. And he came to me afterwards.
Two horns, but yeah.
What's that?
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just saying, yeah, in those pieces there are two oboes and two horns.
Okay. Yeah. All right, thank you, because I've wondered all these years, to be honest with you. Yes, and the cellist came up to me. He was from Minneapolis, and he said, "Did you study with Rodimus Angelucci?" And I said, "I did. How do you know?"
Amazing. That's amazing. Wow.
In like 3 or 4 months, he had this enormous influence on me. And I do consider myself incredibly lucky to have had the chance to study with him.
Oh, that's so special.
Yeah.
I wondered if that cellist playing that concerto was my friend Tony Ross, who's the principal cello of Minnesota Orchestra, and may have overlapped with Rodimus Angelucci. I'm not sure. Tony's probably a little too young to have overlapped with him, but one of the cellists from the Minnesota Orchestra who recognized that sound, recognized it in you. That's amazing.
We do adopt who we study with, the sounds, the person that we study with, so.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Now, tell us a little bit about what else you do. I know you're very busy with your family, if you want to mention that. And then tell us also about what other organizations you play with and perform with.
Well, I'll start with the other ensembles that I work with, because I did that before I had a family. So we'll just start there in chronological order. So I have played with Cheyenne Symphony. Oh my goodness, it's been a very long time. I think 16 seasons, maybe 17.
Wow.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. So I played principal in Cheyenne, and about the same time, I won the audition for Fort Collins Symphony, the second oboe and English horn position, which I think is just the most amazing blend of, you know, second oboe. Your job description is basically to not be noticed too terribly much and to make the principal oboist in the whole woodwind section sound great. And if you get a pat on your back once a season, you're lucky, you know? So So it's a very humble position, which is a great balance compared to principal oboe or English horn. So I'm very thankful to have both positions.
Yeah,
So
it's hard enough to do one of those positions, but to straddle both worlds simultaneously all season long, that's very, very challenging, I bet.
it is. And the English horn is as you know, it's a completely different instrument altogether. It's much, much heavier. It's got a completely different reed. So I've got another set of reeds that I get to make in a completely different instrument with different muscles, because the oboe is a little bit tighter in here. These muscles are used, and the English horn is a little bit farther out for me, and more of these. These things ache when I play the English horn for very long. So,
yeah, right.
yep. So, but I love it. It's great. It's great. It's an amazing world that I live in. And I was thinking, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, William, but I love what I do. I mean, where else do you get applause for putting forth effort for a job well done?
It's so true. I know we're very lucky to have that. Sometimes I almost feel guilty about the applause. Like, oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you liked it, but I really didn't need the applause, but thank you. And that's why I'm always, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I will never take a bow unless the orchestra's standing. And I will never make it about me. I always try to, say thank you, but it's about them. Because it is. I didn't make any sounds. The orchestra did. So I know what you mean, though. It is very nice to have that kind of positive reinforcement after your effort in your job. I like that. Yeah, you're right. We're very lucky in that way. And
We are.
The music that we get to perform is incredible and powerful, moving, and telling stories, which would be a great segue into what you're going to play for us today. Although, I don't know, did I cut you short? And are there other organizations in the Front Range you play and you want to tell us about? Or
I just realized I didn't even mention my family at all. So I should,
Yes.
They're a very large part of my life. I do also, over here in Western Nebraska, we do have a community college where my husband, who's a conductor, is full-time there, and he's in charge of everything under the sun instrumental. It's really remarkable how he's able to juggle it all. I just don't know how you conductors do it. I really don't. But so I'm adjunct over there as well when we have an oboist, which we typically don't. So.
Right.
But my family, we do have 5 kids, and we have 5 kids on purpose. A lot of people ask, and we have them on purpose. And our oldest is 14 and a half and taller than me now, actually. And then one who just turned 12 and one who just turned 8. And one who's about to turn 10. And then we have our youngest who is 5 and a half. And oh my gosh, they're all flamboyant. They all have their fun, fancy personalities, and we have a great time most of the time. Our life is never boring, ever, ever, ever.
And forgive me for asking, but I thought I recalled, and I hope you don't mind my sharing, do you homeschool the kids?
We do. Yeah, we've homeschooled all of our kids up until this last year. We have a fun new twist as of this last month. Our oldest is very into singing and theater, and that we just can't do that at home. So we have changed that. She's going to be a freshman in high school, and she's going to be full-time in public school.
Wow.
So that's a new twist on our life. And our second wants to be in PE and orchestra in the 7th grade, which of course we can't do that either. And our third daughter, who will be 10 very, very soon, wants to be in the public school orchestra as well. So when we started, we said, we'll do this until it doesn't work anymore. And we're so lucky that here in Scottsbluff that they allow us to do half and half, or, a couple classes, or, I mean, I know everybody doesn't have that. So
sure.
Very lucky. Yeah. So.
Well, that is amazing. It sounds like between you and your husband, you all have about 4 or 5 different full-time jobs between the two of you.
You should see my grading pile over there. It's pretty amazing.
Well, and then you were telling me that you were actually teaching violin this past semester or year too, and that's a whole other thing that you've been doing. Yeah,
it is. So there is a out of Omaha Conservatory, they have a violin sprouts program that's kind of like a combination between El Sistema, where it's geared towards lower income people, but also here in Scottsbluff, it's considered an what is it called? I just lost the word. Anyway, people who don't really have a lot of opportunity. So anyway, we're a satellite campus over here for that Violin Sprouts program. So we have years 2, 3, 4, and 5 where my friend Ashley teaches that. And then she said, I'm teaching in all the public schools. If I don't, I'm really concerned about my life and my health and my family if I go and try to teach on a completely different day. And anyway, long story short, I teach year 1, and I'm really not that good. I can play an amazing A major scale with Mississippi Stop Stop. That's about it. I can tune strings, and I finally have a really decent bow hold and a really decent violin.
Oh, that's so great.
It only took me 3 years, that's all.
Can't believe your friend who was so busy and needed somebody to take over the first year of teaching of it went to you, who's probably busier, but that you said yes says so much about you, Gina. That's wonderful.
Well, we certainly value the program. That's how we have so many violinists in our family. And actually, Stacy Lessart said that her very first violin teacher was a woodwind player, because that's how that worked out when she was growing up.
Yes, it certainly did. That's our concertmaster, of course, Stacy Lessart from the.
I took some lessons from Stacy too. I was like, what am I doing? I don't even know how to hold this thing.
Oh my goodness. That's so nice that she did that and you both did that. Well, tell us about the music that you're going to perform for us today.
Okay, so I'm performing Benjamin Britten's Six Metamorphoses after Ovid, actually Metamorphoses, excuse me. And it's for solo oboe, which is very convenient because I can't have a violin accompanist here. So it's in 6 different movements. And I have played this forever. I was introduced to this when I was in junior high school by my very first oboe instructor, whose name is Dr. Kenneth Evans, who taught at UNC for years and years and years. And he was a taskmaster too. So he introduced me to this piece, movement by movement. And I think my favorite thing about Six Metamorphoses after Ovid is that it is for solo oboe, but it is kind of without measure, which really primes the musicality side of the musician. So we are not limited by a certain tempo necessarily. Some of them are a little bit more measured. You're very familiar with this. I'm so excited that we're talking about something familiar to both of us.
Yes, I should share with our audiences that this is a piece that I've known since I was studying oboe, and I played it many, 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 many times too. So these are pieces that I know and love, and so it's so great to talk with you about it. Go ahead.
So this is something that I use with students of mine when they are struggling to make music. And so I pull out Six Metamorphoses after Ovid, and I'm like, okay, well, welcome to the land of no structure. You get to make the storyline.
Right, exactly. For the musicians out there watching, the first movement actually has as a tempo indication, senza misura. So for those of you not familiar with that, that really literally means without measure. So it is a very free piece. There's no time signature. It's just, very, very free. And what a perfect way to try to teach that musicality to your students. That's brilliant, Gina.
Oh, thank you. I think in secret, I think that's what my teacher was doing for me.
Oh.
So the first movement is Pan. But I discovered last night that I've been saying the second, I'm a little gun shy about saying any of these names because I discovered last night I said the second movement's name wrong for over 20 years. So if you know that I am mispronouncing, please feel free to hop on in here. But Pan, of course, basically is the oboist of the Greek mythology. He played upon the reed pipe, which was Syrinx, his beloved.
Yeah, and that Pan first movement is so beautiful. You can almost just imagine Pan among the reeds in like a beautiful meadow or marsh or something, and just picking up a reed pipe and playing it and discovering this beautiful sound. It has this wonderful sense about it and a playfulness too. There's a sad quality, but also a playfulness. Mm-hmm. And then that second movement, Phaeton. Tell us about Phaeton. Of course, these are all based on the Ovid stories. So Britten, being the wonderfully literate and cultured English composer that he was, wrote these very, very short, beautiful little pieces based on 6 of the stories of Ovid, or Metamorphoses of Ovid, from the Ovid Metamorphoses. Go on, I'm sorry.
Sure, no, that's great. So thank you for saying it. That's the one where I had mispronounced it all these years. So I actually have phonetic spellings right here at the top. So I can continue to say it accurately. Phaeton, who rode upon the chariot of the sun for one day and was hurled into the river, is it Pattis?
Yeah.
Okay, Pattis by a thunderbolt. So long story short, he won the chariot races. He came to his dad, who was in charge of the horses that drew the sun across the sky, and said, I want to do that. And his dad had promised if he won the chariot races that he absolutely could do anything he wanted to do. And of course, his dad was like, oh my gosh, here are some basic rules, don't die. And of course,
he died.
Well, we don't want to spoil the ending, but
yeah,
it did not end well.
Now,
and it's really fun. I love all the energy in this particular movement.
Yeah, I always loved playing this one because of those accents that he writes, and it really lets you dig into those accents and really kind of forcefully, very strong tongue them, and it's just so great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Now, we decided that even though these 6 movements are all very short, it might be fun to break it up into groups of 2. So anything else you want to share before we cut right into you performing Pan and Phaeton?
There is, so the Phaeton is really fun because it really explores the lower register of it, which of course is part of the story. There are people who think that the deserts are formed because of Phaeton's mishaps. So it's really fun how it goes literally down to the bottom of the oboe's range. And
it really does. The low B flat, the very lowest note. Scary.
I hope it comes.
People who aren't oboists don't realize that as oboists, we're scared to go down that low.
Yes.
There's a very strong risk that it won't speak.
Right.
Luckily, Britten knew the oboe very well, and he let you go down to a fortissimo.
Fortissimo.
So no problem on that one.
That's true.
You know what else strikes me about these 2 movements, and maybe all the other movements are like this too. When I performed them as an oboist in my teens and 20s, I didn't think of it structurally and formally as much, but I'm thinking that certainly Pan has like an ABA structure, with the playfulness in the middle. And then Phaeton also, in a way, is sort of a little bit of that, ABA. And maybe that's something that, even though there's no measure to the piece and it's very free, it might help our audiences kind of know where they are, in that each individual little movement has a little 3-part structure, something like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Should we go into it?
I'm sorry?
Should we go right into it now?
I love it, yes.
Okay, thank you. This is Gina Johnson performing Benjamin Britten's Pan and Phaeton from Six Metamorphoses after Ovid.
about the car.
Bravo, Gina. So wonderful to hear these pieces. Yeah.
They're fun.
They are, yeah. And they really, they use the entire range of the oboe, don't they? In terms of high and low, like you pointed out, that very lowest note. It also has some pretty high notes, not the very highest notes, but range in terms of the note range, but also range in terms of expression too, huh?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, yep. They're quite distinct. They act just like themselves in the music. Britten did a brilliant job, I think, capturing their spirits.
He really did. He really did. Well, tell us about the next two. We're going to be, as I mentioned before, we're going to hear of the 6 movements, 2 at a time. So tell us about the next 2.
Okay, so the next 2, I'm placing things in a different order. And then what's actually suggested by the composer. I've always felt that there was a better way to end it. So I'm just taking some artistic liberties here. So
I think it's great, yeah.
So my next 2 are actually the last 2 in the whole lineup. Narcissus is actually movement 5, but I'm going to play it 3rd. And then Arethusa is movement 6, but I'm going to play it 4th. So Narcissus, who fell in love with his own image and became a flower. So we all know about the narcissus flower that bends over like this. Well, that's connected to that. So Narcissus, this is really an interesting movement because we have stems going up and we have stems going down. And it is, it's actually written in the music itself that at a certain point in the music, the stems that are going down, so you have the note and then you have the stems going down from that, that is Narcissus himself. And then when you have the note and the stems going up from there, then that is his image. And it's really interesting how it all comes together. I'm going to show this to you right here, if you guys can see it. This is so tricky when it's mirrored.
Yeah, and for audiences who aren't musicians, when we say stem, we're talking about that little thing that comes off of the note head. And you can see from what Gina's holding up, some of the notes are kind of going upward above the staff of the 5 lines, and some of them are kind of facing downward. That shows that the ones going upward are the reflection, and the ones downward are Narcissus himself, and he's just in love with his own image. He's such a narcissist.
And I think for me the trickiest part is actually right here, where you're going notes or stems down to stems up to stems down to stems up, and how I think the hardest thing for me on this particular movement is how to convey that to the audience. And this movement in particular continues to be a very challenging movement because I really try so hard to communicate to the audience, and I still kind of feel like I'm here and this is like just a little bit beyond me. And I wonder if I'm ever going to conquer that particular page. But I will do my best. And particularly over, not being a live performance.
Sure.
I'm hoping that the technology will work for us, but we can't guarantee that. But I'll do my best.
Well, Gina, I think you're being very modest. I think it's going to be brilliant and beautiful. And I think as oboists, we will always strive to convey those spots, but I don't think we'll ever be able to have our audiences fully understand the reflection the way it's written on the page. And that's just one of the things that as oboists, we will always perpetually try to make more and more clear, but it might be impossible. So, yeah.
It certainly keeps it interesting. That's
it
for
does.
sure.
It does.
For us to constantly strive for the next thing.
And then tell us about Arethusa, that other movement.
So Britten wrote in just a quick little blurb for each of the 6 movements. And Arethusa, who flying from the love of Alpheus, the river god, was turned into a fountain. And again, I think Britten did a brilliant job of depicting the fountain and the flowing water, and it's just really, really well done. And it is also in an ABA form. So you've got this all of this stuff going on, and then right in the middle, it's got kind of like shimmering water sound, like the trills, and it's a melody with all of these trills, and I always think of like sparkling water, so it's a completely different flavor. What do you think of when you get to that point?
Yes, I mean, at that point, I just think of, where am I going to breathe? He was lucky. He was very kind in the first section to give us a lot of little breaks, but then by that point, it's just, I guess there are still breaks every so often. It's not too hard, but I remember this one is really challenging. He gives you the kind of liberty to take time on the first note of each measure, encouraging that, which is wonderful. But it still has to have a sort of rhythmic flow to it. It is still a little bit more in a tempo than, let's say, Pan was. But I love your interpretation of it. I wasn't sure if I guess in my mind, when I was younger and I was playing this, I thought maybe the ba-da-da-da-da-da-da had to do with like water coming off of a fountain. But I like your interpretation that the water comes in later and it's in that middle section. I like that.
I think you're talking about where do I breathe? That's what I think of when we go back to that A section at the end. I'm thinking, I got to play all these lines, all these notes in one breath. Holy cow.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So it's fun. It's fun. I think it's going to be really neat for people to hear this one.
Yeah.
Incredibly well written.
It is. So this is Narcissus and Arethusa from Benjamin Britten's Six Metamorphoses after Ovid. Enjoy. Bravo again, Gina. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
We're
It's fun
so
to hear all the water. What was that?
Yes, it's fun to hear all the water in that Arethusa movement. Exactly. Yeah. Um, I was just going to say we're so lucky to have such a talented first oboe in our orchestra. Yes.
Thank you.
And it's been lovely to feature you in a number of solos over the years and in a concerto about, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago when we did the Strauss together. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was special. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, can I tell a quick little fun story?
Please.
When I found out that you're an oboist, that really intimidated me when
Oh,
you got voted in. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's going to be picking on everything that I do and everything. Oh gosh. And then you turn out to be just the most wonderful, compassionate conductor. So I am very thankful
Oh,
to have
good.
somebody who knows, and yet you don't, you still have a very high bar for me, and I really appreciate that. So
Oh, thank you for saying that. That's so nice. No, I definitely sympathize with the oboes. And I mean, if there are reed issues, there are reed issues, and non-oboist conductors might not fully understand it. And I mean, anytime the weather dramatically changes, which in Cheyenne is about every 5 minutes,
yes.
our reeds change dramatically. And so I have a funny story to tell you, which is this. I was so excited that you were such a wonderful first oboist that when shortly after I started with Cheyenne, I programmed a very big oboe solo. I've programmed a lot of big oboe solos over the years, you have to admit. I've had you in mind. But Tchaikovsky's Fourth. So when we did Tchaikovsky's Fourth, one of the things that I forgot to keep in mind is that although the second movement starts with the most beautiful oboe solo, you would be performing that at almost 7,000 feet elevation, and it's hard to do it in 2 breaths. And not only that, tell them what else happened at that time in your life when you performed that. Do you remember?
Was that when
You were pregnant too.
I was pregnant.
So you were pregnant at the time, and you were performing this legendarily difficult to get enough breath oboe solo. It's not difficult because it's slow, but it's beautiful and musical. But to do it with the right breathing is hard. And I should have known better as an oboist to program that. But you did it beautifully.
Oh, thank you. You didn't know I was going to be
I
having.
didn't know you were going to be pregnant. That's what the surprise was. But I also forgot, oh my goodness, I knew it's hard at sea level, but to do it at 7,000 feet. It's like, lucky that you didn't have one of those skiers' oxygen tanks or something, the little oxygen boost. Yeah. All right, well, tell us about the last 2 movements of the Britten.
Okay. Well, these are truly some of my very favorites. The third movement, which I'm playing 5th, is called Niobe, and it's so emotional. Oh my goodness. So let me read this to you so you know why it's emotional. Niobe, who, lamenting the death of her 14 children, was turned into a mountain. And I'm just going to let the music do a lot of the talking. It's just so heart-wrenchingly beautiful. It's in this gorgeous key, maybe not the funnest to play in, but it's got 5 flats. And so it's all these alternate fingerings all over the place, which technically, even though this doesn't sound like the most difficult of movements, it's actually technically very difficult.
Oh, yeah.
So, and it really explores all of the things that oboes do. I have the coolest story. My 12-year-old is the most precocious kid. And about 2 years ago, she came to me and she said, so Mom, what do oboes do? And I said, well, we give the tuning A, and I told her all of the job descriptions that we do. We play a lot of solos, blah, blah, blah. And she said, no. So if I were a composer and I wanted to write for an oboe, what would I be writing for? What kind of emotions? And I said, wow, that is a great question. Yeah. And I said, well, we sigh a lot, and when we pop the octave, we have the solo and then we pop the octave, we heighten the emotion of the moment, no matter what it is. It's like an emotion, boost of whatever emotion we're experiencing at that time. We do a lot of transitions. So we have a melody and we do the hey, we're going to tie this melody together kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
it was just a fun question to answer. So pretty much everything that the oboe does, we get to hear it in Niobe.
Yeah, it's
And,
so true.
Yeah.
Tell us what Britten wrote next to the dynamic in the very first measure.
Piangendo.
Crying.
Crying.
Crying. Oh,
Oh.
so beautiful and sad.
Yes, yes.
And then
My biggest challenge in this one is to remember to start at mezzo forte, like what it says, because it's just so,
yes.
But I forget that it starts with a, instead of,
Right.
So,
Yes.
if I start it too quietly, I have no place to go, dynamic-wise.
That's so true. That is so true. And it also has a lot of freedom in it, a lot of these pauses. The way he's, as our listeners have heard already in the first movements that you've been playing, the way he uses silence is so important. And knowing how much time to give the silences is important, isn't it?
Tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's tricky. That takes just some time to know as a seasoned musician how long is too long, how long is not enough. So
Yeah.
this has changed and grown
so
over the years.
Yeah. I love the way that he did it for the music as well as for breathing for the oboist. He knew that the oboe needs a lot of time to breathe. Now, if you're not an oboist and you're watching this, you might find this surprising, but as oboists, we have to do something special when we breathe. We don't just breathe in, play, and then breathe in again. Tell us what we have to do, Gina. Tell them.
The opening to our reeds is so small. So if you were to take a straw and then squish it closed and then blow into this glass of water, you would end up with too much air. And that's essentially what we're doing at the same time that we're trying to remember how to play this solo and, think, and we're slowly running out of oxygen and brain power. So what we have to do is we actually have to breathe out first to make room for fresh air to come in.
It's so interesting. People don't realize, and that's very different than, let's say, a flute. So yeah, when we're out of breath and we take the reed out of our mouths, oboists breathe out first. Because it's stuck somewhere in us. We can't use that breath. We're still completely out of breath, but we can't use that. Anyway, it means that we take longer to breathe.
Yes.
And Britten has worked that into the music perfectly, but in such a way that he didn't just do it just for the nuts and bolts reasons of breathing. So cool.
It is. It's incredible writing. I think that's why we keep coming back to this piece, don't you think?
I think so, yeah.
Because he really
tell us about the last movement too.
Okay, so the last movement, you were mentioning at some point that Bacchus, which is movement 4 technically, but I've always thought that Bacchus steals the show. In all of these 6
it's my
movements.
favorite.
And so, of course, we know Bacchus is the town drunk of the Greek mythology. And he loves to party. So Bacchus, at whose feasts is heard the noise of gaggling women's tattling tongues, blah, 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 and shouting out of boys. You're going to hear 3 characters. You're going to hear drunk Bacchus, who can't tell his story to save his life. And then you're going to hear, shame on you, you're always drunk, blah, 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 blah. Come and help me in the kitchen, and then you're going to hear these boys running around, blah, 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 doing what my boys do, and probably your boys do too, right, William? That's why you're sequestered in your son's bedroom. That's why my kids aren't even here, is because we do have shouting out of boys in our lives.
Yes.
So, really fun. I love how Britten really distinguishes between the 3 characters, and sometimes they kind of blend together a little bit because we are at a party and we're going to hear them all, but this is my favorite movement by far. So
too. I love Pan as well, and I probably have played Pan more often because I used to, when I would go into visit schools and stuff and play my oboe for kids, Pan was one of the pieces I played, and I probably played that for probably a couple hundred different school classrooms because it's short and it tells a really great about the oboe, the first movement. But Bacchus, truth be told, is my favorite too. Yeah. Well, let's hear it.
A little bit unforgiving. So it ends on the high F. So you've heard the low B flat.
That's right.
Now you get to hear the high F in Bacchus at the very, very, very end, which I think is part of the reason I think it should end the whole thing.
Yes, you're right. And although that note is not considered our absolute highest note as oboists, at the time Britten wrote this in 1950-ish, 1951, it probably was considered the highest note back then. So, or the highest safe note, non-experimental note. So as we talked about earlier, he gave us the very low B flat and now the very high F. So you get to hear the whole range.
Yes.
All right, well, we'll start with Niobe. So we'll start with that sad, lamenting piangendo, and then we'll transition into Bacchus. Here we go.
Okay.
Brava, Gina.
Thank
Beautiful
you.
playing.
Thank you. This has just been, I love this piece. And anytime I get to perform it, it's just a treat. So, and it sounds
Well,
like
it's
you've
been
been
a treat
listening.
for us.
What's that?
It's been a treat for us, not just your performance, which was wonderful, but also getting to know you better during this time. This was great. Seeing your cat stroll through. What's your cat's name, by the way?
Her name is Moo.
Moo. Oh yeah, she was a black and white cat. Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have another one named Snowball, and he just doesn't like to show up. But he's white with a black tail, so we have monochromatic pets in our house.
Yeah. Well, I guess you have a monochromatic work outfit when you're in the Cheyenne Symphony. So.
This is true.
It's been so fun visiting with you, Gina. You're such a wonderful part of the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. You make the performances so special whenever you play, and we miss hearing you live with the orchestra, and we can't wait to get back together, perform with you and all of our friends and colleagues in the Cheyenne Symphony, and for all of our friends in the audience.
Thank you. I'm so looking forward to getting back together. So I just have a couple more things. May I pop a couple things in there?
Yes,
well, first of all, I hope everybody is staying safe and being careful out there. And it's a very different time. And I hope that even in the midst of trials that we're still finding the silver linings. I know that we've had some very difficult times here, but I know that we've also had some things happen positively that frankly could not have happened if we didn't have the time quarantined together as a family.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, and then also I understand that, William, it's your birthday. So I wanted to wish you a happy birthday today.
Thank you so much. And I understand you have a birthday coming up in a couple days.
I do.
Happy early birthday to you.
Thank you very much. Just 4 days apart. We have birthdays 4 days apart.
Well, a few years apart. I think I'm quite a bit older. But yeah, just 4 days apart in our birthdays. It's so special.
It is.
Gina, if people wanted to hear you perform, are there other places online they could see you or hear you perform?
Yes, actually, so Fort Collins Symphony has also asked for some recording projects as well, and I was very happy to do it. It's fun to have a deadline. It's fun to have something to work toward, and I have very much appreciated Cheyenne Symphony and Fort Collins, both of you guys coming up with outside the box solutions to those of us who have nothing to perform for. So now we do. Thank you. Yeah. So if you want to go on the Fort Collins Symphony website, I do have I didn't play all of the variations by any stretch of the imagination, but I do have a Twinkle Twinkle Little Star variations that I put up there. And yep, so you'll look under the Keep Us Playing campaign, I think is where they have that filed.
Keep Us Playing on the Fort Collins Symphony website.
Yes.
All right, great. Anything else?
Gosh, I'm excited to see everybody in the fall, audience members, and orchestra members, and you as well, William. Thank you.
Yeah, I am too. I can't wait to get back together. Thank you so much, Gina. Gina Johnson, our wonderful principal oboist, featured tonight on Virtuoso. Until next time, thank you for tuning in, and keep music in your lives during this time too. Thank you very much. Good night, Gina.
Good night.